I've had a few requests, people having a little trouble with the trigonometry to possibly, give them a hand, show them another example, stuff like that. So I've decided to create this little video here to maybe show you the steps again. And hopefully maybe once you do these things 2, 3 times, you'll start getting the hang of it. Nothing beats good practice, but sometimes we all do need a little extra, maybe example or just a little guidance, and I don't mind at all. So if I have this particular trigonometry equation here, or trigonometry problem here, I'm asked to find r, z, and phi, and I'm given x and I'm given theta, okay? Now, they ask you in this order r, z, and phi for whatever reason. Personally, I always go ahead and find the other angle, especially if I'm given one. Okay, because what it does is it gives me more options on which trig ratios I can use to solve, which hopefully makes it easier on me. Okay, I'm trying to be more efficient. So this angle up here, if I redraw my triangle and I fill in the measurements, and I'm not worried about my units right now. There's no prefixes. It's just plain old ohms. I'm not worried about anything but knowing that these are ohms. Now this is here 28.7 degrees. So my angle phi is 90.28.7. Always true when we're doing these right triangles. First of all, the sum of the angles in any triangle is 180. So if you're given 1, we know this is 90 because it's a right triangle. Okay, we don't ever find this, but that's a given that that's 90. So therefore, these other two have to add up to be 90. Okay, which gives me my 61.3. Now, I don't know r or z. Okay, so I'm going to find r now. Okay, I'm just going to find r now. Now, I don't know if, as you're doing your homework, if you have to answer these things one at a time, but it doesn't matter. You can certainly type them in the way they ask you to type them in, but it doesn't mean you have to find what they ask you to in the order that they tell you to do it. Okay, I try to make it easier on myself. All right, so here's your setup now. We've got two unknowns here. Cannot use trigonometry or Pythagorean theorem yet because we only know one side. If you know two sides, Pythagorean theorem is the best way to do this. You just have to use it properly. So I'm going to show you the two choices that you have here. Now, anytime you are going to find an unknown, okay, you first have to choose the reference angle you're going to use, because that's the whole point of trigonometry. All right, the ratio of two sides has to equal an angle measure. So therefore, when I want to solve for a side or an angle, I need to choose a ratio of two sides and the appropriate trig equation. So I reference my angle first. I don't want to find z yet because the hypotenuse is definitely always the most difficult to solve for, and I always try to save that for the Pythagorean theorem. So if I choose this angle as my reference angle and I want to find r, I know x. So the only choice I have for my trig equation is tangent. So tangent of 28.7 is 8.7 over r. Now I also go ahead and set up my ratio, so I can cross multiply. So here's where the mistakes happen. Not setting up your ratio correctly, using cosine, and where you can't use cosine here, or sine. You can't choose the trig equation and then put your sides in. You must choose the angle of reference, your sides involved, then that leads you to your trig equation. Now that's one way. Now I'm going to show you why I found this angle up here first. If I reference this angle, again, I still only know r and x, but I can still use tangent because that's the opposite over adjacent. And that gives me the opposite ratio, which is how these things work. Now, sorry about that. That's the 8.7 here. So I look at the setup here. If I'm going to cross multiply, which one is easier? Well, if I cross multiply here, I still have an extra step to solve for r. If I cross multiply here, it's a one-step problem. So the whole point of why I found that angle first was to give me more options to make my finding the sides easier. Okay, so if I cross multiply, not across, cross, make your x. If you're messing this up, make your x. So I'm going to take r times the tangent of 28.7 equals 8.7 times 1, which is 8.7. Now, at any point in time, you can make this into the decimal representation. So if I figure out the tan of 28.7, that's going to give me 0.5475. So I'm going to go ahead and take that out to 4 decimal places. Now, the algebra skills are what's important here too. It's what all that solving you did, all that practice you did solving is what helps you find the unknown. So r, I divide both sides by the 0.5475. 8.7 divided by 0.5475. And I get 15.9. Okay. Doing it this way, now you can see the extra steps here. Doing it this way, r is 8.7 times the tangent of 61.3. Cross multiply again. So I can just punch this right into my calculator. Right as you see it, depending on the calculator type you have, type it right in. With this calculator, I've got a 36x. I've kind of got to do things a little backwards here. And again, I get 15.9. So you can see the difference in the number of steps this takes. And you get the same answer. Okay, so there's sometimes some planning. Plan ahead, figure out, okay, what's the best trig equation to use? Sometimes you don't have a choice, and you have to go with what you got, but you have to make sure you're getting these tangent, sine, cosine ratios correctly. Make sure you're using the appropriate setup, and then make sure you're solving correctly. So a lot of steps here. Now, to find z, z is the hypotenuse. So z is z squared equals x squared plus r squared. So then z is the square root of x squared plus r squared. Again, sometimes your mistakes are from calculators, okay? So my z is 8.7 squared plus 15.9 squared. So I go ahead and I'm going to figure out what those answers are. So z, once I square them and add them together, I get 328.5. Now I take the square root and I get z is 18.1. Okay, so to check yourself, your hypotenuse is always the longest side. You can also go back to your triangle up here and say, okay, I found r was 15.9, z was 18.1. So based on my angles, the largest angle between these two is opposite the longest side, and this should be the shortest angle. Don't go by the way the triangle is drawn or looks. It's just a reference. Okay, so hopefully this helps, but nothing beats practice, practice, practice. The more you do, the better you'll get at it. It's like anything you do in your job. The first day on your job, you were clueless probably with the most of the stuff you're doing, but the more you do it, the better you get at it. Okay? So don't quit. Don't give up. Stay with it and practice. All right? So hopefully this helps.